Before the influencers, the GPS trackers, and the onboard cameras, there were Eddie Stobart drivers in the 90s, real working-class road warriors who rolled through rain, sleet, and diesel fumes like it was just another Tuesday. And back then, driving for Eddie Stobart, that was the big leagues. Getting behind the wheel of one of those immaculate green and white rigs was like being handed a uniform with a badge of honor. It meant you were sharp, you were disciplined, you were part of something bigger than yourself. But let's not sugarcoat it. Life behind the wheel in the Stobart cab wasn't all smooth tarmac and waving fans. It was long hours, early starts, cold laybys, and relentless pressure to deliver on time and keep the company's spotless image intact. You weren't just a truck driver, you were part driver, part brand ambassador, part cleaner, and part customer service rep. From the moment you started your shift, your truck had to shine, your uniform had to be pressed, and your attitude had to be dialed in. The company had rules, lots of them. No stubble, no messy cabs, no loud music or swearing on the CB. Your boots had to be clean. You had to wave at fans on the road. And God help you if you parked wonky at a motorway service station. Stobart had a reputation to uphold, and every driver knew they were being watched. Some called it strict, others called it pride. But deep down, they all knew one thing. Driving for Stobart meant something. The days were long. Most started before dawn, with the glow of a cabin light flickering on somewhere in a sleepy yard, while the rest of the country was still dreaming. You'd run through your checks: oil, tires, lights, trailer, and then you were off. Rain bouncing off the windscreen, thermos of strong tea in the cup holder, Radio 2 humming in the background. And out onto the roads you went, weaving between towns, depots, and loading bays, logging miles while the world passed by in a blur of gray skies and dual carriageways. The loads varied. Pallets of frozen chicken, supermarket dry goods, fragile electronics, didn't matter. The weight was always heavy, the route always tight. You had to think 3 steps ahead: where to refuel, where to park if the loading dock was full, how to get back on the M6 without wasting 15 minutes. But more than anything, you had to look good doing it. The truck had to gleam, mirrors polished, cab swept out, dash dusted. Some lads carried wax spray and polished rags in the side pocket. A dirty Stobart truck? That was basically a crime. And when you weren't rolling, you were parked up, sometimes at a proper truck stop with bacon sarnies and hot coffee, other times on a cold industrial estate with nothing but the sound of your ticking engine and the faint rattle of chains in the wind. You learned to sleep sitting upright, learned to nap during loading delays, learned which laybys were safe and which ones to avoid unless you fancied a flat tire or a missing mirror by morning. But despite the grind, the community was strong. Stobart drivers waved to each other on the road. You'd flash your lights and get a flash bag. You knew who was in what truck. You saw them at the same depots, same diners, same services week after week, swapping stories, sharing warnings, laughing about the rookie who tried to reverse a trailer into a dead end in Doncaster. The CB radio was alive, full of banter and sarcasm. But when someone needed a hand, directions, help with a frozen coupling, jumper cables, you dropped everything and sorted it, because that's what it meant to be on the team. And then there were the fans. That part was wild. Kids wrote letters to the depot asking for signed photos of their favorite trucks. People stood on bridges just to wave. Drivers became local legends. Some carried spare toy lorries in the cab to toss out to kids at service stations. One minute you're hauling pallets in a traffic jam. The next you're giving a thumbs up to a 6-year-old who knows your truck's name by heart. Of course, the pressure could wear you down, the schedules were brutal, the targets were tight, and the company's expectations didn't budge. You had to be perfect every day, no delays, no excuses. You were representing the most iconic fleet in the UK, and every mile was watched. Every complaint meant a write-up, every mistake meant someone else was waiting to take your spot. But for a lot of drivers, that pressure was part of the pride. You didn't just clock in and drive, you showed up and performed. And when your shift finally ended, and you rolled back into the depot with a full logbook and an empty stomach, you shut down the engine, stepped out into the evening air, and looked back at that gleaming rig one more time, covered in grit, running on fumes, but still looking like it just came off the showroom floor. That was the job. That was the life. And for many, those years in the 90s behind a Stobart wheel, they weren't just a career, they were the ride of a lifetime. There's something surreal about waking up in a fogged up cab at 3:47 in the morning, heater wheezing, window cracked an inch to let out the condensation, and the only thing you hear is a distant fox scream. and the rattle of a passing freight train. That was life for Stobart drivers in the 90s. You didn't get luxury, you got routine, and the routine was survival. Roll out of the bunk, fire up the engine, grab a cold sandwich or maybe something from a plastic container you'd packed 2 nights ago. Then back on the road before sunrise, before the world even knew you existed. Night driving was a different beast. The roads were empty, sure, but the cold hit different. The isolation crept in. You'd have the radio on, maybe some old school Rod Stewart or Tina Turner keeping you company. The CB would chirp now and then, fellow drivers calling in hazards or sharing dodgy shortcut tips. But sometimes it was just silence. Mile after mile, alone with your thoughts, watching the cat's eyes flicker under your wheels, hoping you wouldn't hit a delay that'd throw your whole route out of sync. Sometimes you'd pull in late at a service area only to find the trucker section full, a line of lorries already snaking out onto the curb. That's when you'd start improvising, finding a quiet pull-in down a B road, checking the mirrors twice, locking up tighter than a vault. In winter, you'd curl under your jacket with the bunk heater doing its best impression of a dying hairdryer. In summer, windows down, hoping the mosquitoes didn't eat you alive. That was the trade. The romance of the open road came with a drafty bunk and instant coffee. Then came the early morning queue at the depot, a dozen Stobarts lined up outside a loading dock in Milton Keynes or Warrington. Horns tooting, boots crunching gravel, drivers walking back and forth to check manifests, swap jokes, or just stretch out their backs. There was always a sense of silent competition. Whose truck looked the best? Who'd kept their cab cleanest? Who got loaded first and slipped away before the others? That quiet pride ran deep. You could tell a lot about a bloke by the way he looked after his lorry. The staff at the drop points knew the Stobart crews. You'd show up and someone would already be ready with paperwork. No messing about. They knew you weren't like the others. You were on time, always. Polite, presentable. The Eddie Stobart uniform carried weight. It opened doors, got nods, got you a faster unload. That's what made it worth it. The hard graft earned you respect, not just from the company, but from everyone you met along the way. And in between all that, there were the stories. The time a driver hit a dead fog patch on the A1 and had to crawl for 60 miles at 20 miles per hour with just one taillight showing in the distance like a beacon. The guy who pulled over to help another Stobart rig with a flat and ended up rebuilding a brake line in a frozen car park with nothing but a wrench, a lighter, and sheer grit. The time a group of drivers all met up by chance at a truck stop on Christmas Eve and sat together eating microwave turkey sandwiches like it was the Ritz. These were the moments that made it feel like more than just a job. You see, behind all the polish and publicity, the reality was tougher than most knew. Miss a drop-off, you had to explain it. Get caught with a messy cab, expect a call. It was strict, but it was fair. There were high standards, but also high regard. If you did your job right, you were looked after. And drivers looked after each other too. Blown tire in the middle of nowhere? You'd have someone pulling over within minutes. Someone you'd probably never met, but who saw those familiar colors and knew you were one of their own. By the end of the week, your body ached. Your eyes stung, and your logbook looked like a battlefield. But the sense of accomplishment, nothing compared. You didn't just survive the roads, you mastered them. And when you parked up that truck, walked away across the yard with your thermos in one hand and your jacket slung over your shoulder, you knew you'd done something that mattered. Those days might be gone, but for the men and women who lived it, who rolled through rain-slicked roads in an FL10 with the heater humming and the fan belt squealing, the memories never fade. They weren't just employees, they were part of a rolling legacy, a living fleet of polished steel, diesel hearts, and unmatched pride. And no matter how digital the roads get now, that kind of spirit, that never really dies.